morning air on Kepler 442b carried the scent of unfamiliar minerals and distant rain. Commander Sarah Chen watched as the transport shuttles descended through the pale orange sky, carrying the latest batch of Academy cadets to the survival training grounds. Among the diverse group of alien species stepping onto the rocky terrain, one figure stood out, not for size or unusual anatomy, but for the simple fact that everyone else gave him a wide berth. Marcus Thompson shouldered his standard-issue survival pack and looked around at his fellow cadets. The Zephyrians towered above everyone else, their crystalline skin catching the alien sunlight. The Makari moved in precise formations, their forearms already organizing equipment with military efficiency. The aquatic Nereidans stayed close to their portable water tanks, their gills fluttering nervously in the thin atmosphere. "Attention, cadets." The voice belonged to Instructor HFY, a seasoned Mokari whose battle scars told stories of countless campaigns. His 4 yellow eyes swept across the assembled group, lingering briefly on Marcus. "Your assignment is simple in concept, challenging in execution. You have 72 standard hours to construct adequate shelter, using only materials available on this planet and the basic tools in your survival kits." A Zephyrian cadet named Krillax raised one of his crystalline appendages. "Define adequate shelter, Instructor." "Protection from the elements, storage for supplies, and defensive positioning," HFY replied curtly. "You will be evaluated on structural integrity, resource efficiency, and strategic thinking. The weather patterns here include sudden temperature drops to -30 degrees Celsius and wind speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour." Marcus nodded quietly, already scanning the landscape. Rolling hills covered in purple vegetation stretched toward distant mountains. A stream wound through the valley, and he could see patches of what looked like clay deposits near the water. Scattered groves of tall bamboo-like plants swayed in the breeze. "Standard Academy protocol applies," HFY continued. "No assistance between species groups. No use of powered tools beyond what's provided. Begin when you hear the signal horn." As the cadets dispersed to claim their territories, Marcus noticed the whispered conversations around him. The universal translator caught fragments in a dozen languages, but the tone was unmistakable. Skepticism mixed with condescension. "Humans," clicked a Mokari cadet to his companion. "They barely mastered fire when we were building stellar engines. I heard they only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago," added a Nereidan, her voice bubbling through her water mask. "They're still using projectile weapons in their military." A Zephyrian's crystalline voice chimed in musical tones that somehow managed to sound dismissive. "Their homeworld is a single biome planet. How much survival experience could they possibly have?" Marcus had heard it all before during his time at the Academy. Humanity was the newest member of the Galactic Federation, barely a century since first contact. While other species had millennia of spacefaring experience, humans were still figuring out which end of a plasma rifle to hold. The fact that he'd been accepted into the Elite Academy's survival program at all was considered by many to be a diversity initiative rather than merit-based selection. The horn sounded across the valley, its deep note echoing off the distant cliffs. Immediately, the organized chaos of construction began. The Mokari teams moved like clockwork, their forearms allowing them to work at incredible speed. They began excavating perfectly geometric foundations for what appeared to be underground bunkers. The Zephyrians used their natural crystalline growths to form structured frameworks, building upward in spiraling towers that caught and reflected light. The Nereidans worked in teams near the stream, constructing elaborate waterworks that would allow them to maintain proper hydration while staying dry. Marcus walked slowly through his chosen area, a gentle slope near the stream but elevated enough to avoid flooding. He knelt down and scooped up a handful of soil, crumbling it between his fingers. The texture was different from earth soil, more clay content but workable. He moved to the stream and tested the water flow, estimating volume and seasonal patterns based on the wear marks on the banks. While other species immediately began construction using their technological advantages, Marcus spent the first several hours simply observing. He watched the movement of shadows to track the sun's path. He noted which direction the wind primarily came from by observing the lean of the tall plants. He dug small test holes in different locations to understand soil composition and drainage. As the day progressed, the sound of construction filled the valley. Power tools hummed, crystalline structures chimed as they grew. and the Mokari teams called out coordinates to each other in their precise mathematical language. Marcus remained quiet, making small marks in the dirt with a stick, sketching rough plans. By evening, when the other cadets had made significant visible progress on their structures, Marcus had barely disturbed the ground in his area. A few of the Zephyrians had paused their work to watch him, with what might have been amusement, their crystalline faces reflecting the setting sun in prismatic patterns. "The human appears to be thinking," observed one Zephyrian to another, the universal translator rendering the comment with a tone of scientific curiosity, as if observing an unusual specimen. "Perhaps their species requires extended processing time for complex tasks," replied his companion. Marcus heard the comments but didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, especially when those words had to cross species barriers. Instead, he watched the alien sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and violet, noting how the temperature began to drop as the larger moon rose above the horizon. Tomorrow, he would begin building. Tonight, he would plan. The other cadets settled into their partially completed shelters, most having achieved basic wind and rain protection. The sounds of the alien night began to emerge, strange calls from unseen creatures, the whisper of wind through the bamboo-like groves, and the distant rumble of geological activity from the volcanic regions beyond the mountains. Marcus rolled out his sleeping bag under the open sky, using only his pack as a pillow. The alien constellations wheeled overhead, and he fell asleep to the sound of running water and the gentle rustling of purple leaves, his mind already working through the construction sequence for tomorrow. Dawn broke over Kepler 442b with the peculiar double sunrise that marked this world's unique orbital mechanics. The smaller sun crested the mountains first, painting everything in pale blue light, followed 20 minutes later by the primary star that bathed the valley in warm gold. Marcus had been awake since the first light, not from any alarm but from a lifetime of camping trips with his grandfather in the Canadian wilderness. While the other cadets began their second day with the methodical continuation of their projects, Marcus finally broke ground. But his first action surprised even the monitoring drones. Instead of beginning construction, he started digging what appeared to be an irrigation channel from the stream toward his chosen building site. Krillax, the Zephyrian who had spoken the day before, paused in his tower construction to observe. "Is the human moving water?" he asked his teammate, genuine puzzlement in his crystalline voice. "Perhaps their species has aquatic requirements we weren't briefed on," replied his companion, though both had studied xenobiology extensively and knew humans were terrestrial. The Mokari teams, despite their focus on efficiency, began sending one of their four-armed scouts to observe Marcus every few minutes. Their mathematical minds struggled to categorize what he was doing into any recognizable construction pattern. Marcus worked steadily, using his entrenching tool to create a channel roughly 2 feet wide, but instead of a straight line, he curved it in gentle S-shapes, creating a meandering path that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. Where the channel would pass his building site, he dug a small pond barely 3 feet across and 2 feet deep. "Water collection," noted Commander Tehek, a Mokari instructor monitoring the exercise from the mobile command post. "Inefficient design, but it shows basic resource awareness." Instructor Vexahai clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "The human is demonstrating unusual patience. Most species begin with shelter first, address water needs later." By midday, while other cadets were making impressive progress on increasingly elaborate structures, Marcus had completed his water channel and filled his small pond. The stream, now fed into his system, overflowed through the pond and continued downstream, creating a small oasis in his construction area. Only then did he begin gathering building materials. But again, his approach differed from his classmates. The Mokari teams had identified the most durable materials and harvested them with scientific precision. The Zephyrians had located mineral deposits that complemented their natural crystalline abilities. The Nereidans had focused on materials that provided the best water resistance. Marcus went into the bamboo-like grove and spent an hour simply walking among the tall plants. He tested their flexibility, examined their growth patterns, and eventually began selecting specific specimens. Not the largest or the straightest, but ones that met criteria only he seemed to understand. He's choosing inferior materials, observed a Neridan team leader. Those plants show stress marks and irregular growth. Her teammate agreed. Our scans indicate the straighter specimens have superior tensile strength. But Marcus continued his methodical selection. He chose plants that had grown in windy conditions, their fibers strengthened by constant movement. He selected ones that had survived what appeared to be fire damage, their cellular structure toughened by trauma. Each cut was made with careful attention to the plant's natural grain and growth rings. As he worked, he began to whistle, an unconscious habit from his childhood helping his father build their family cabin. The melody was an old earth folk song about building homes in the wilderness. The alien cadets found the sound fascinating. Music was universal, but human melodies followed patterns that were distinctly different from other species' compositions. The human produces rhythmic vibrations while working, noted a Mokari observer. Possible efficiency enhancement through auditory stimulation. Or nervous behavior, suggested a Zephyrian. Some species vocalize when stressed. Marcus, unaware of the commentary, continued his work. By late afternoon, he had gathered an impressive pile of bamboo-like poles, each cut to specific lengths that formed mathematical relationships. Longer poles exactly double the length of shorter ones, medium poles fitting precise geometric ratios. To the watching aliens it appeared random. To Marcus it was the foundation of traditional timber framing techniques his grandfather had taught him during summers in British Columbia. As the sun began to set, he finally started construction. But instead of beginning with walls or foundations like every other cadet, Marcus started with what appeared to be a simple wooden frame lying flat on the ground. He joined the bamboo poles using techniques that required no metal fasteners. Complex, interlocking joints cut with nothing but his standard-issue knife. Interesting, murmured Instructor Vexhai. No adhesives, no molecular bonding, no energy-based fusion, purely mechanical joinery. Primitive, commented Commander T. Heck, but surprisingly precise. The joints Marcus cut were variations of ancient earth carpentry techniques, mortise and tenon dovetails and complex scarf joints that locked together like three-dimensional puzzles. Each cut was made with patient precision, shaving thin curls of alien wood until the fit was perfect. As darkness fell and the other cadets activated their portable lighting systems to continue work, Marcus stopped for the day. His accomplishments appeared minimal: a channel, a pond, a pile of cut timber, and a single wooden frame lying on the ground. The Mokari bunkers were half complete. The Zephyrian towers glittered in the artificial light. The Neridan teams had created impressive water management systems. But Marcus simply built a small fire using traditional friction methods. Cooked a simple meal over the flames and settled in for the night. The fire served multiple purposes: warmth, cooking, and light, while consuming minimal fuel. The smoke also helped keep away the small flying insects that had emerged with darkness. The human is behind schedule, observed a monitoring officer. Significantly, agreed another. Current progress suggests project failure within 18 hours. But Instructor Vexhai studied the human's work area through enhanced imaging systems. The water channel showed sophisticated understanding of flow dynamics. The timber selection demonstrated knowledge of material properties that wasn't immediately obvious, but would become apparent under stress. And the single completed frame showed joinery techniques that would maintain structural integrity without any external support systems. Perhaps, he said quietly, we should wait before making predictions. Marcus banked his fire and settled into his sleeping bag, but unlike the previous night, he didn't fall asleep immediately. Instead, he lay quietly, listening to the sounds of alien construction continuing around him. The hum of Mokari power tools, the harmonic resonance of growing Zephyrian crystals, the splash of water in Neridan systems. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he would show them what a human could build when patience met knowledge and tradition combined with innovation. The frame he'd completed today was just the first of 12 identical structures he would need. Each would take less time than the last as he found his rhythm and refined his techniques. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Measure twice, cut once, boy. And remember, The forest will teach you everything you need to know if you're patient enough to listen. The alien forest around him whispered secrets in languages he couldn't understand, but the principles were universal. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The third dawn brought with it the kind of weather that separated survivors from casualties. The monitoring station's atmospheric sensors registered a 40% drop in temperature, wind speeds climbing toward the dangerous thresholds Instructor Vexhai had warned about, and the approach of the first major storm system since the exercise began. Marcus woke to the sound of urgent activity throughout the valley. The Mokari teams were working frantically to seal their underground bunkers before the weather hit. The Zephyrians had discovered that their beautiful crystalline towers, while structurally sound in calm conditions, resonated dangerously in the increasing wind. Several Neradan teams were struggling with water management systems that hadn't accounted for the storm drainage patterns. The human cadet emerged from his sleeping bag, glanced at the darkening sky, and calmly began the most extraordinary construction sequence the Academy instructors had ever witnessed. Working with smooth, practiced movements that spoke of muscle memory built over years, Marcus began raising his first frame. The bamboo-like poles fit together with mechanical precision, forming a rectangular structure approximately 12 feet by 16 feet. But instead of struggling with the weight like most humanoids would, he used a technique the alien observers had never seen. He raised the frame using a gin pole system, employing leverage and physics to lift weights far beyond his apparent physical capacity. How is he managing that load? Asked Commander Tehek, studying the sensor readings. Human physiological data indicates he should require assistance or mechanical aids. Instructor Vexhai watched with growing interest. He's not fighting the weight, he's redirecting it. Observe the rope angles and fulcrum points. Within 2 hours, Marcus had raised and secured his first wall frame. But he didn't stop there. Moving with increasing speed and confidence, he began raising additional frames. Each joint locked into place with satisfying precision, the ancient earth carpentry techniques proving their worth on an alien world. The watching cadets began to take notice. The Mokari, despite their focus on their own projects, found their mathematical minds fascinated by the geometric relationships in Marcus's construction. The angles weren't random. They formed complex patterns that created mutual support throughout the entire structure. His measurement system, observed Krillax, pausing in his own work to study the human's progress. It's based on proportional relationships rather than absolute units. His teammate nodded, their crystalline surfaces chiming softly. Every component relates mathematically to every other component. Self-scaling architecture. By midday, as the storm clouds gathered ominously overhead, Marcus had raised the complete frame of what was clearly becoming a substantial building. But where other species had focused on creating shelter from their environments, Marcus appeared to be building something designed to work with the natural forces around him. The roof structure puzzled the observers most of all. Instead of a simple peaked design like most primitive shelters, Marcus was creating something far more complex. The rafters formed intricate patterns that would distribute loads in multiple directions, and the angles were calculated to shed wind rather than resist it. Aerodynamic principles, muttered a Mokari engineer. He's treating the structure like a spacecraft hull. But Marcus wasn't done. As the first drops of alien rain began to fall, he started on the most mysterious aspect of his construction, the walls. Instead of simple vertical barriers, he was creating what appeared to be a complex double wall system, using the clay he'd identified near the stream. Working with practiced skill, he mixed the clay with chopped organic matter from the purple vegetation, creating a composite material that hardened quickly but retained flexibility. The mixture went between his timber frame and thick layers, but he left specific gaps that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. Insulation system, observed Commander Tehek. Crude but potentially effective. No, corrected Instructor Vexhai, studying the patterns more carefully. Look at the gap placement. It's creating controlled airflow patterns, thermal regulation through passive ventilation. As the storm finally hit with full force, the differences between construction approaches became dramatically apparent. The Mokari bunkers, while structurally sound, immediately began suffering from condensation problems. The mathematical precision that made them efficient also made them rigid, unable to adapt to changing conditions. The Zephyrian towers swayed alarmingly in the wind, their crystalline beauty becoming a liability as harmonic resonance threatened to shake them apart. Several teams had to abandon their structures and take shelter with neighbors. The Nereiden water management systems designed for controlled flow became overwhelmed by the storm's intensity. Carefully planned channels became raging torrents that threatened to undermine foundation work, but Marcus's structure seemed to come alive in the storm. The flexible joints allowed the entire building to move slightly, like a ship riding ocean swells. The complex roof system shed wind and rain with elegant efficiency. And most remarkably, the controlled airflow through his wall system meant that while protection was complete, the interior remained comfortable and dry without feeling sealed or stagnant. Impossible, breathed a Mokari observer, watching sensor readings from the human's construction. Internal temperature is holding steady without any energy input. Humidity levels are optimal. Air quality is actually improving. As if that weren't impressive enough, Marcus wasn't finished. Working steadily through the storm, seemingly unaffected by conditions that had forced other teams to halt construction, he began work on what could only be described as a fireplace and chimney system. Using the same clay composite techniques, he built a sophisticated combustion chamber with carefully calculated airflow patterns. The chimney rose through the center of his structure, but instead of simply venting smoke, it was designed as a heat distribution system that would warm the entire building while providing proper ventilation. Heat pump principles, observed a Zephyrian engineer, their voice filled with something that might have been respect, using thermal mass and convection patterns to create climate control. Without any technology, added their teammate. Purely mechanical and chemical processes. But the most astounding development came as the storm reached its peak intensity. While other cadets huddled in their shelters waiting for better weather, Marcus emerged from his nearly completed structure, carrying what appeared to be seeds and small plants he'd gathered during his earlier explorations. Working in the driving rain, he began establishing what could only be called a garden around his building. The irrigation channel he dug on the first day suddenly made perfect sense. It directed stormwater through carefully planned beds where he was now planting alien vegetation in patterns that seemed to serve multiple purposes. Food production, identified a Nereiden observer, but also erosion control and microclimate modification. The root systems will stabilize the soil around his foundation, added her teammate, and those particular plant species will process excess moisture while providing windbreak protection. As night fell and the storm continued its assault on the valley, the monitoring station painted a clear picture of the exercise's progress. The Mokari bunkers were secure but uncomfortable. The Zephyrian towers were partially collapsed or abandoned. The Nereiden systems were functional but struggling, and in the center of his chosen territory, Marcus Thompson sat comfortably beside a crackling fire in his completed shelter, watching his newly planted garden drink in the storm water while his building performed like a precision instrument designed specifically for this world's unique challenges. Status report requested. Instructor Vexhai, the human has achieved complete shelter construction in 68 hours, reported the monitoring technician. Structure shows optimal performance under storm conditions. Integration with local ecosystem is unprecedented. And the other teams? Requesting permission to seek emergency shelter, sir. Vexhai looked out at the storm, then at the readings from Marcus's remarkable construction. Permission granted. Direct them to the human's position, sir, I believe, said the instructor quietly. We are about to learn something new about the definition of adequate shelter. The knock on Marcus's door came at Euro 347 local time, barely audible over the howling wind but unmistakable in its urgency. He opened the handcrafted wooden door to find Krillax standing in the driving rain, the Zephyrian's normally radiant crystalline surface dulled by stress and exhaustion. My tower collapsed, Krillax said simply, his translated voice carrying an emotion Marcus had never heard from a Zephyrian before. Humility. May I seek shelter here? Marcus stepped aside without a word, gesturing the alien into the warm, dry interior of his cabin. Krillax entered and immediately stopped, his optical sensors taking in details that defied his understanding of primitive construction. The interior space was larger than the exterior dimensions should have allowed, an effect created by the precise proportions and clever use of vertical space. A fire crackled merrily in the stone fireplace, its light dancing off carefully fitted wooden walls that showed no gaps despite being built from rough materials. The air was warm but fresh, circulated by the passive ventilation system built into the walls themselves. How? Krillax asked, running one crystalline appendage along a wall joint so perfectly fitted it might have been grown rather than built. Before Marcus could answer, another knock came. This time it was a Mokari team leader named Hexstar, his forearms trembling with cold despite his species' normally robust constitution. "Our bunker flooded," he admitted. The water table calculations were incorrect for storm conditions. Marcus welcomed him in as well, hanging the Mokari's equipment near the fire to dry. Within an hour, his cabin had become an impromptu rescue center as more cadets arrived. 2 more Zephyrians whose towers had failed, 3 Nereidans whose water management systems had been overwhelmed, and finally a complete Mokari squad whose mathematical precision had proven inadequate against the chaotic forces of nature. What struck the aliens most wasn't just the shelter itself, but how it accommodated everyone. The interior seemed to expand to meet the need, with sleeping areas that could be reconfigured, storage spaces that revealed themselves when required, and seating that adjusted to the ergonomic needs of multiple species. "This is impossible," declared Hexstar, studying the construction with his analytical mind. "The materials you used have known limitations. The tools available to us cannot create such precision. How did you achieve molecular-level bonding without technology?" Marcus, busy preparing hot drinks over his fire, looked up with a slight smile. "I didn't need molecular bonding. I used something better." "What could be better than molecular bonding?" asked a Nereidan engineer, genuinely curious. "Understanding," Marcus replied simply, handing her a warm cup. "Wood is alive even after it's cut. It has memory, stress patterns, natural strengths and weaknesses. Metal fasteners fight against those patterns, but if you work with them instead of against them, you can create joints stronger than the materials themselves." He moved to one of the wall sections and pointed to a complex joint where 2 beams met. "This is called a scarf joint. It's been used on Earth for over 3,000 years. See how the grain lines flow together? The wood itself wants to connect this way. I just gave it the opportunity." Krillax approached for a closer look, his optical array focusing on the microscopic level. The cellular structures are interlocked. Not just mechanically, they're continuing biological processes across the joint boundary. "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "The wood doesn't see it as 2 separate pieces anymore. It's healing into one continuous structure." As the storm raged outside, the aliens found themselves drawn into a conversation unlike any they'd experienced at the academy. Marcus began explaining the principles behind his construction, not the mechanical aspects, which they could analyze with their sensors, but the philosophical foundation that made it work. "Your species builds to overcome nature," he said, settling cross-legged beside the fire. "You see the environment as an opponent to defeat. Humans learn differently because we had to. We're not the strongest, fastest, or smartest species on our planet. We survived by learning to work with natural forces instead of against them." A young Mokari named Kexalin, barely old enough for academy admission, raised one of his 4 hands. "But surely advanced technology is superior to primitive methods." Marcus gestured around the cabin. "Is this primitive?" "It's providing better shelter than any of your advanced constructions. It's maintaining perfect climate control without power. It's strengthening itself over time instead of degrading. And when the storm passes, it will improve the local ecosystem, rather than damaging it." He stood and moved to one of the windows. Actual transparent panels he'd created using a glazing technique, involving heated sand and careful cooling. Through it, they could see his garden already taking shape despite the storm. The carefully selected plants directing water flow and preventing erosion. "Your bunker," he said to Hexstar, "fights against the groundwater. My foundation channels it where it needs to go. Your tower," he nodded to Krillax, "tries to stand rigid against the wind. My cabin flexes with it. Your water systems try to control the flow, but mine works with natural patterns." A Nereidan engineer named Salvek spoke up. "But how did you learn these patterns so quickly? You've been on this planet for the same time we have." Marcus returned to the fire, adding another carefully selected piece of wood that would burn clean and provide optimal heat. "Every planet with life follows the same basic principles. Water flows downhill. Wind follows pressure gradients. Living things seek optimal conditions. Plants grow toward light and away from danger. If you understand these principles, you can work with them anywhere. But the specific applications, pressed Hextar. The exact measurements, the precise angles. How did you calculate them without instruments? I didn't calculate them, Marcus replied. I observed them. The stream showed me drainage patterns. The vegetation showed me wind directions and soil conditions. The local materials told me their properties. I just listened to what the environment was teaching. Krillax's optical array flickered in what his species used to indicate deep thought. You're describing a form of intelligence we don't possess. Not analytical intelligence, but adaptive intelligence? Maybe, Marcus considered. My grandfather called it forest wisdom. He said the wilderness was the greatest teacher if you knew how to learn from it. As the night wore on, the conversation deepened. The aliens began to understand that they weren't just sheltering in a superior structure. They were experiencing a completely different approach to problem solving. Marcus wasn't just building a shelter. He was creating a relationship with the environment. The garden, observed Salvek. It's not just for food production, is it? Food is part of it, Marcus confirmed. But those plants will also process waste, regulate humidity, provide medicine, attract beneficial insects, and create a microclimate that makes the whole area more habitable. In 10 years, this spot will be a small oasis that supports more life than it did before I arrived. 10 years? Hextar's voice carried shock. This is a temporary exercise facility. Marcus shrugged. Maybe for you, but every place humans have ever been, we've tried to leave it better than we found it, even if we're only staying for a few days. The aliens exchanged glances, a complex communication that crossed species barriers. They were beginning to understand that they hadn't just underestimated human construction ability. They had fundamentally misunderstood what humans meant by shelter. Outside, the storm began to weaken as dawn approached. But inside the cabin, a different kind of storm was building. A complete reassessment of everything the Galactic Academy thought it knew about survival, technology, and the newest members of the Federation. Marcus, said Krillax quietly, when this exercise is evaluated, what do you think the instructors will conclude? Marcus smiled, poking the fire to send a shower of sparks up the chimney. I think they're going to have to rewrite the definition of adequate shelter. The morning after the storm brought crystal clear skies and the kind of crisp air that made every detail stand out in sharp relief. As the evaluation teams descended from their shuttles, they found a valley transformed not just by the storm, but by what had emerged in its aftermath. Admiral Kethmara of the Zephyrian High Command stepped carefully around puddles that reflected the double sunrise, her crystalline form refracting the light into prismatic patterns. As head of the Academy's Survival Training Division, she had overseen thousands of exercises across dozens of worlds. But the sensor readings from the past 72 hours had prompted an unprecedented visit from senior command staff. Beside her walked General Vorthak, the four-armed Mokari, whose strategic mind had planned some of the Federation's most successful military campaigns. His yellow eyes swept the valley with practiced precision, cataloging damage, assessing recovery times, and calculating resource expenditures. Initial reports, Admiral Kethmara requested as they approached the monitoring station. Instructor Vexhai stepped forward, his battle-scarred carapace gleaming in the morning light. 17 structures attempted, 11 completed to minimum standards, 6 failures requiring emergency evacuation. Storm damage was extensive, and the human, General Vorthak's voice carried the kind of neutral tone that preceded either commendation or court-martial. See for yourself, sir. They crested a small rise and looked down into Marcus's territory. What they saw defied their understanding of survival construction. Where other cadets had built temporary shelters designed to endure until rescue, Marcus had created something that looked like it had been there for decades. The cabin sat comfortably on its elevated position, weathered but solid, its wooden walls gleaming with the patina of a structure that had found its place in the landscape. Smoke rose steadily from the stone chimney, and the surrounding garden showed signs of vigorous growth despite having been planted in a storm just hours before. Status report on the human structure? Admiral Kethmara requested. 0 storm damage, Vexhai replied. Optimal internal climate maintenance throughout the weather event. Current occupancy, 12 cadets from 6 different species. General Vorthak's 4 eyes focused intently. Occupancy? The human structure became an emergency shelter for cadets whose constructions failed. All occupants report superior comfort levels compared to their original accommodations. As they approached the cabin, Marcus emerged to greet them. The human showed no signs of the stress and exhaustion that typically mark survivors of severe weather events. Instead, he appeared refreshed and confident, moving with the easy grace of someone perfectly at home in his environment. "Admiral, General," he nodded respectfully. "Would you like to inspect the structure?" What followed was the most unusual academy evaluation in recorded history. Instead of a simple structural integrity test, they found themselves receiving a guided tour that revealed layer after layer of sophisticated design philosophy. "Traditional timber framing," Marcus explained, pointing to the complex joint where the main support beams intersected. "The entire structure is held together by compression and tension forces. No metal fasteners, no adhesives, no external power sources. But it will actually grow stronger over time as the wood seasons and the joints tighten." Admiral Kethmara ran her crystalline sensors over a wall section. "The insulation properties are remarkable. How did you achieve thermal regulation without environmental controls?" "Double wall construction with controlled airflow," Marcus replied, showing them hidden vents that created passive circulation patterns. "The building breathes like a living organism. Warm air rises through the wall cavity, cool air enters at the bottom, and the thermal mass of the stone chimney stabilizes temperature fluctuations." But it was the integration with the local ecosystem that truly astounded the evaluation team. The garden wasn't just a food source. It was a carefully designed biological system that processed waste, regulated water flow, and created beneficial microclimates. "These plant selections," observed General Vorthak, studying the rapidly growing vegetation with his analytical mind. "They're creating nitrogen fixation in the soil, aren't they?" "Among other things," Marcus confirmed. "The root systems will prevent erosion, the canopy will moderate temperature extremes, and several species produce compounds that repel harmful insects while attracting beneficial ones. In a few months, this area will support more biodiversity than it did before construction began." Inside the cabin, they found the rescued cadets engaged in activities that would have been impossible in conventional survival shelters. Krillax was using the stable lighting from the windows to study crystalline formations he'd collected. The Mokari team had spread their technical manuals across a wooden table Marcus had crafted from excess materials. The Nereidans were comfortable despite being far from water, their respiratory systems functioning normally in the perfectly regulated atmosphere. "The humans shared food with us," reported Hextar when questioned privately. "Not just emergency rations, but fresh preparations using local vegetation he identified as safe and nutritious. Our biochemical analysis confirms his identifications were completely accurate." "Without testing equipment?" Admiral Kethmara asked. "He explained his methods," added Krillax. "Observation of local wildlife, analysis of plant structure and chemistry through sensory examination, and knowledge of universal biological principles." His success rate was flawless, but perhaps the most significant discovery came when General Vorthak asked about defensive positioning, one of the 3 criteria for evaluation. "Defense isn't just about withstanding attack," Marcus explained, leading them to vantage points around his construction. "Location provides natural protection from multiple directions. The elevated position offers excellent sight lines. The structure itself could withstand significant assault, while the garden provides concealment and multiple escape routes." He pointed to aspects of his construction that the aliens had missed entirely. The cabin's orientation provided optimal firing positions while minimizing exposure. The garden's layout channeled approach routes into predetermined zones. Even the irrigation system could be quickly modified to create defensive barriers. "But more importantly," Marcus continued, "this type of construction creates alliance opportunities. Every cadet whose shelter failed found refuge here. In a real survival situation, that means 12 potential allies instead of competitors." The evaluation team exchanged glances loaded with meaning. They were looking at strategic thinking that operated on completely different principles from standard Federation doctrine. As the formal evaluation concluded, Admiral Kethmara found herself facing a decision that would echo through Academy training for generations to come. The human had not only met every criterion for the exercise, he had redefined what those criteria meant. "Cadet Thompson," she said formally, "your structure demonstrates adequate shelter by any measure we might apply. But I'm curious about your long-term intentions for this construction. Marcus looked out over his garden, where alien plants swayed in the gentle breeze, already showing signs of the robust growth that would transform this corner of the valley. If it were up to me, Admiral, I'd leave it exactly as it is. Maybe future cadets could use it as a study site, learn how human survival techniques might complement their own approaches. And if other species wanted to learn these techniques? Marcus smiled, the expression carrying warmth that translated across species barriers. My grandfather always said that knowledge grows when it's shared. I'd be honored to teach anyone interested in learning. General Vorthak stepped forward, his forearms clasped in a gesture of formal respect. Cadet Thompson, how would you respond to a proposal to establish a new curriculum track at the Academy? Cross-species survival techniques with emphasis on environmental integration and sustainable construction? Marcus looked around at the cadets who had become his impromptu roommates, aliens who had arrived as dismissive competitors and were leaving as colleagues. I think that sounds like exactly the kind of thing humanity joined the Federation to accomplish. Sir, the evaluation ended not with a simple pass or fail, but with the recognition that the Academy had just witnessed the emergence of an entirely new approach to survival training. And at its center was a young human who had learned his most important lessons not in any classroom, but in the Canadian wilderness, building cabins with his grandfather under the endless sky. 6 months later, the Kepler 442b training facility bore little resemblance to the temporary exercise ground it had once been. What had started as a single human survival project had evolved into the Federation's first integrated environmental survival institute, with Marcus's original cabin serving as both classroom and living laboratory. Commander Sarah Chen, now promoted to Director of Cross-Species Training Programs, stood on the observation deck of the new administration building, itself constructed using modified versions of Marcus's techniques, watching the morning class preparations. Below, cadets from 17 different species worked together on projects that would have been inconceivable under the old training protocols. Status report, Lieutenant Thompson, she said as Marcus approached, his new rank insignia still looking unfamiliar on his uniform. Morning briefing in 20 minutes. Ma'am, Marcus replied, checking his schedule pad. We've got the Altarian delegation arriving this afternoon for the sustainable construction demonstration, and the Mokari Engineering Corps wants another session on adaptive structural design. Sarah smiled at the transformation in the young officer who had arrived here as an unknown quantity and was leaving as something unprecedented, humanity's first official instructor in Federation survival training. And your grandfather's reaction to the Academy's interest in traditional earth-building techniques? Marcus's grin was infectious. He's still convinced this is all an elaborate practical joke, but he's agreed to be a guest instructor for the summer session, something about teaching them space critters how to swing a proper hammer. Through the observation windows, they could see the morning's most remarkable sight, the evolution of Marcus's original garden into something that defied classification. What had started as a survival vegetable patch had become a thriving ecosystem that served as a living textbook for environmental integration. Students from across the galaxy came to study how human agricultural techniques could restore damaged environments while providing sustainable resources. The Zephyrian Council's decision, Sarah asked. Unanimous approval for the technology exchange program, Marcus reported. They want to implement bio-integrated construction techniques in their colony worlds. In exchange, they're sharing their crystalline growth technologies for specialized applications. It was a partnership that exemplified the new direction Federation training had taken. Where one species had competed to demonstrate technological superiority, they now collaborated to combine their strengths. Mokari precision engineering merged with human adaptive design. Zephyrian energy manipulation enhanced Nereidan water management. And at the center of it all, human philosophy provided the framework for working with environments rather than against them. Admiral Kethmar's recommendation came through this morning, Sarah continued, handing Marcus a formal communication pad. The Federation Council has approved full funding for the expansion program. 15 more training facilities with human instructors at each site. Marcus scanned the document, his expression growing serious. That's a lot of responsibility. Are we ready for that kind of expansion? The question isn't whether we're ready, Sarah replied. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for what happens when human ingenuity gets properly integrated into Federation doctrine. They were interrupted by a commotion from the main training area. Through the windows, they could see a crowd gathering around one of the advanced construction projects, a joint Mokari human team working on what appeared to be a completely impossible structure. "What are they building now?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know. Marcus grinned and activated the enhanced viewing system. The structure below defied easy description. Part building, part organism, part machine. Mokari engineering precision had created a framework of mathematical perfection, but human techniques had made it alive. The walls grew rather than being assembled, using a hybrid of plant cultivation and construction that created living architecture. Kexelin calls it biomechanical integration, Marcus explained. The Mokari provide the structural mathematics, humans contribute the organic integration techniques, and together, we're creating buildings that literally evolve to meet changing needs. And it works? Better than either approach alone. The structures are stronger, more efficient, and they improve their own environments over time. We've got colonies requesting the techniques for terraforming applications. Sarah watched as a young Mokari cadet worked alongside Marcus's star pupil, Krillax, who had become humanity's most enthusiastic advocate in the academy after his experience in the storm. The crystalline being and the four-armed engineer were problem-solving together with a synchronization that would have been impossible under the old competitive training model. The real success story, Marcus continued, isn't the technology transfer. It's the relationship building. These cadets aren't just learning new techniques. They're learning to think like their teammates from other species. As if to illustrate his point, a group of Nereidan cadets emerged from the water management complex. Their latest project, a perfect fusion of their natural aquatic expertise with human watershed management principles. The result was a water system that didn't just provide resources, it actively improved local water quality while supporting increased biodiversity. The ripple effects are remarkable, Sarah observed. Colony reports indicate that worlds using integrated construction techniques are showing accelerated environmental recovery rates. Because we're not building despite the environment anymore, Marcus explained. We're building because of it. Every structure becomes part of the local ecosystem instead of fighting against it. A soft chime indicated the approach of the morning briefing. As they made their way to the conference room, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a simple survival exercise. A young human's grandfather had taught him to build cabins in the Canadian wilderness. That knowledge, transported across the galaxy, had fundamentally altered how an entire federation of species approached the basic challenge of creating livable spaces. "One last question. Lieutenant," Sarah said as they reached the briefing room, "do you ever regret that first night, sleeping under the alien stars while everyone else was already building?" Marcus paused at the door, looking back through the windows at the thriving complex that had grown from his small beginning. Students from dozens of species worked together on projects that pushed the boundaries of what was possible when different approaches to problem-solving merged into something greater than the sum of their parts. "You know what my grandfather told me the day I left for the academy?" he said. He said, "Boy, remember that everywhere you go, you're representing not just yourself, but every human who ever looked at a forest and saw home instead of just trees." He opened the door to the briefing room, where alien instructors and human students waited to plan the day's lessons in survival, cooperation, and the endless human capacity to find opportunity in any challenge. "I think," Marcus concluded, "he'd be proud of what we've built here." Behind them, through the windows of the observation deck, the morning sun illuminated a landscape transformed. Where once there had been barren training grounds, a garden paradise flourished. Where once species had competed in isolation, communities of learners worked together toward common goals. And at the heart of it all, a simple wooden cabin stood as a reminder that sometimes the most advanced technology was the wisdom to work with nature instead of against it. The human had been given a shelter-building assignment. But in the end, he had built something far more important, a bridge between worlds, constructed from nothing more than patience, knowledge, and the understanding that every problem was an opportunity in disguise. The legacy would endure long after the last timber had weathered away. carried forward by every student who learned that true strength came not from overpowering the universe, but from finding their place within it.